All right. Good morning, everyone, again. So we left our lecture on Tuesday on this slide. So we were looking at the architecture of the Qin and Han dynasty in China. So this period basically covers a little more than 2 centuries on each side of the Christian year 0. Right? So basically 200 years from about 200 BCE to 200 CE. This is a crucial period because it is the period during which 2 major Chinese systematic religions, namely the Confucianism and the Taoism, were formulated. And they were both transformed from a kind of philosophical thinking into a organized, institutionalized religion. And both were also incorporated into the Chinese bureaucratic system, or the organized into the system for imperial governance. And so in the traditional Chinese thinking, in both Confucianism and Taoism and other thoughts, other philosophies, the universe was kind of classified into the 3 realms of heaven, earth, and human being, the human world. So this is like on top of all those religious differences. This is a kind of a general Chinese worldview, right? So the heaven is like the domain of the gods and the goddesses, the heavenly beings that were kind of having control over earth and the human affair. So that's above the divine realm of heaven. And then there is the earth. The heaven represent the supreme yang, and the earth represent the supreme yin. And in between yin and yang, and because of the interaction of yin and yang, the world was created, and the human being is living in between the heaven and the earth. So to some extent, the human being, human society, and the entire kind of world was a product of this kind of interaction of yin and yang, heaven and earth. So while the gods watching the earth from above, he had a kind of a representative to rule the human world on earth. And that figure in traditional Chinese thinking is known as the Son of Heaven. So the title you can, we learn from the title, the very title, Son of Heaven, we know that he is making the connection, like between the heaven and earth. He was representing heaven because he was the Son of Heaven, representing heaven to rule. And this idea was, we don't know when the idea started, but we do know during the Zhou dynasty, which is, from 11th century BCE to 3rd century BCE. The idea was pretty much well established. The king of Zhou was the son of heaven, representing God's will to rule the earth. And we also know all the Confucian classics came from the Zhou dynasty. Confucius, he claimed that he was only editing, making notification, making comments, and writing down what was established by the earlier sage rulers from the Zhou dynasty. So he didn't consider himself as an singular author. He believed he was passing down something really, really significantly, those Confucian classics. And those Confucian classics include a very important, one of the major Confucian classics is called the Book of Rites, right? The Book of Rites talk about, in one volume, there are 3 major books of rites. In one of them, it talks about what the Son of Heaven do during a cycle of a year. And it specifically points to an architecture called Mingtang. So this is the name I wrote here. So in the Book of Rites, so it talk about all those ritual ceremonies to give harmony to the human society. All right, that's basically what that book is about. So it's talk about Mingtang, and it talk about what the Son of Heaven was supposed to do in this architecture, in this building, during a cycle of a year. We also know from the same book that Mingtang was not only a religious center, but also an administrative center. And at the same time, it is also an educational center. The Son of Heaven performed ritual ceremonies in the Mingtang building. Mingtang, literally, it means the bright hall. Ming means bright, and the Tang means hall. So it's a religious building because ceremonial ritual performances were carried out in this building. It is also an administrative center because the Son of Heaven issue significant edicts from this building. It is also a kind of educational center because the Son of Heaven was also meant to give lectures here to the students from the kind of imperial institution, imperial universities. So probably during the Zhou dynasty, this is a building that is kind of multi-tasked. It's hard to just pin it down to any specific function according to our modern kind of a categorization of functions. So in the ancient time, sometimes those functions are pretty much together. For example, it's hard to differentiate religion from education in some modern cultures. For example, in Tibet or in the Arabic world, sometimes religion is education, and for a very long time, temples and mosques were the only institution that offer education. So in ancient China, it was probably in very similar situation, education, religion, and how to govern the country. It's hard to separate these things. So it's a comprehensive building. That's why we use the word Mingtang. We use the Chinese word, and we do not, call it a temple, or call it a palace, or call it a, university. We use the original word because none of the modern word captures the entire meaning of it. So let's just call it Mingtang and try to define it. So for a very long time, we have no idea what Mingtang might look like, even though there were illustrations in the Book of Rites from later reprints, the Ming Dynasty reprints, for example. But no archaeological data were available on the specific, size and shape and style of this very important building. Because after Tang Dynasty, basically Mingtang as an architectural type disappeared in Chinese history. But a archaeological excavation in the southern suburb of Xi'an recovered a Han Dynasty Mingtang. And this Han Dynasty Mingtang illustrated here give us a very good idea about what a Mingtang looked like in the Han Dynasty, which might also kind of related to the Zhou Dynasty prototype, because Han Dynasty is not that far away from the Zhou Dynasty, only a few centuries after the fall of the Zhou court. So from the archaeological plan, we see that the first characteristic of this building is the interaction of circle and squares. Circle represent heaven, square represent earth, right? So there are many layers of circle, square, and circle. Which could be understood as representing the interaction of yin and yang, the interaction between heaven and earth, which illustrate the function of this building very well, because the function of this building is to be occupied and to shelter the performances by the Son of Heaven, who is believed to be the connection made between the heaven and earth. So he was the Son of Heaven to rule the earth. So having this heaven and earth symbol in the general design is very appropriate to its function. But much more than that, archaeological data also shows the building has 3 levels, right? So there are 3 levels. On the ground level, the center of the ground level is an earth core. So there's a rammed earth platform in the very center. And it is surrounded by a corridor from all 4 sides, right? And And then the second level, there's still an earth core, but that earth core is a little bit smaller than the lower one. And surrounding it, there are a series of rooms. Okay, so this is the plan. This plan is actually the plan of the second floor. So the plan of the second floor is illustrated here. The plan of the first floor, the earth core, the shaded area is slightly bigger, and then there are 4 protruding kind of corridors. The second floor, on the 4 cardinal direction, on each of the 4 cardinal direction, there are 4 big rooms. The building itself is very accurately oriented according to cardinal direction. So this arrow shows the direction of north, right? This is northern direction. So 4 big rooms. The big room in the north. This is the big room in the south. The big room on the west. The big room on the east. Outside the 4 big rooms, each one of them has 3 smaller rooms. So there is, smaller rooms, 3 of them on each side. So in the Book of Rites, it was said that during the first month of spring, the Son of Heaven would perform ritual on the left room of the east direction. That is in this building. All right, so this is east. So when we talk about left or right, so we imagine we are facing that direction, right? Facing east. This is the first from the left. This is the left building. This is the middle building, middle room. And this is the right room, right? So it says in the first month of spring, the Son of Heaven wear light green robe and has light green banners and flags accompanying, performing specific music for the early spring season, and eat a certain kind of meat. And in that month, he actually eat mutton, the goat, the meat from goats or sheeps, etc. and etc. He also issue edict that is suitable for the growth of things. And he was not supposed to issue edict for war or for punishment, etc. So he was meant to make a command that is helpful for the spring season. That is, in spring season, the trees start sprouting and all the plants start growing. So it's the season of life, for the beginning of life. The book went on. He was also, accompanied by certain kind of music. So there's a lot of detail, the main thing is that in that certain month, he needs to do certain thing, and he is kind of accompanied by certain music and a dance, and he was meant to issue command appropriate for that time. And the color associated in that ritual is light green. you know, whether his robe or, you know, the banners, room decoration, it's all kind of light green. So the book went on. During the second month of the spring, the Son of Heaven is going to perform in this room. And same thing, you know, he needed to do similar thing, but the color change to green, kind of a not light anymore, green, blue-green, basically. That's what the Chinese word mean. And he also needed to do appropriate thing for the second month of spring, so on and so forth. So the third month of spring here, and then the following that is the first month of summer. During the first month of summer, he is going to occupy this room, and now the color changed to red. Right, so he needed to wear red robes, etc. and etc. You know, eat certain meat, accompanied by certain music, certain dance, and issue certain edicts appropriate for that month, etc. and etc. So the summer in this building, early summer, middle summer, late summer, those 3 months, 4, 5, 6 of the year. And now you can guess. In the autumn, in the fall season, he is going to occupy these 3 rooms. Early fall, mid-fall, late fall. So his robe color and banners color change to white, all right? So the west side, so everything is white now. And then for winter, early winter, mid-winter, late winter, the Son of Heaven needs to perform in this building. The color changed to black, right? So, east blue, blue and green, south red, west white, and the north black. You know, blue green. Those sometimes has ambiguity in the Chinese words. You know, sometimes blue and green are using the same word. There are many different words describing blue and green. Anyway, you know, you get the idea. The Book of Right for this most important building and the most important performance for the Son of Heaven is year-round. So he is doing those ritual activities, each one in a year. And as a result, each of these rooms, smaller rooms, represent a month of the year. So in total, there are 12 of them. And these 4 big rooms, they must represent the seasons. And there are 4 seasons of for a year. So what does this mean? By having the Son of Heaven performing different rites in different rooms over the circle of a year, and then, of course, after the last month of the winter, a new year start. So he needed to continue performing the first month of spring once again. So it never ends. It just goes round and round. The architecture of Mingtang, in one word, created a space-time complex for the Son of Heaven to coordinate the universe. And by doing so, he is claiming the status as the kind of intermediate between heaven and earth. So the son of heaven is like the sun and the moon in the sky. It goes in cycle and it never ends. And as long as this kind of ritual performance is carried out by a certain person, and that person can claim that he was the son of heaven because he was kind of mimicking the way heaven is being operating, like the season, the change of season, the rise and fall, and orbiting of the sun. So he is kind of a, he is like one of those heavenly body. And according to the Chinese tradition, if a son of heaven failed to do this, he would lost his favor of heaven. It's called the mandate of heaven. And so the building of Mingtang basically is an important building to legitimize the status of son of heaven. So that's its significance. And that is probably why it is talked about, it has been discussed by those rulers, because this is the building to make a statement about themselves as the lawful representative of heaven, of God's will to rule earth. And there are more to it. You know, there's a building, you know, on the second level, we have these buildings, but there is also a building located on the top, the third floor, the third level. And that there is a big room. On the third floor, there's no earth core anymore. It's just one big hall, one big building on top of the platform. So that building, during winter solstice, the son of heaven was meant to go to the top of Mingtang, and there he was supposed to be able to communicate with God, to hear the command of those heavenly beings, and then to pass on those information, heavenly information, to earth. So that is a special room. Excuse me. And one of the major kind of command he was supposed to receive from heaven was the calendar. All right. So basically, after winter solstice, after that communication with God, the son of heaven was meant to publish a calendar to his people, to let his people know, you know, what is the exact time next year will start. And, you know, what is specific time to plant, to sow the seeds, and what is the specific time to harvest their crops. All right, so that, you know, calendar publishing is one of the major tasks of the son of heaven. So he was meant to define time. He was meant to tell his people, you know, what is a specific date and what that means for agricultural society. So basically, a traditional Chinese calendar are named according to how the farmers need to do for their soil to bring about a successful harvest, a successful year, to bring about a good year. So in the ancient time, calendar is sacred. It's like, for someone who was able to tell people a calendar, it's like he had the authorization of God. No one could do that except that you can interpret the will of God. And the Son of Heaven was meant to perform that task. And that precisely made him sacred. Of course, he had a lot of advisors. He had those priests helping him, but that is kind of the upper class, the group of upper class. They had the knowledge. They had the knowledge of astronomy. They were able to predict, the time and the weather, and in the form of issuing a calendar. So in ancient time, a calendar is very important. It's not like today's calendar. It's just tell you, which day is Wednesday, which day is it's September, 25th. It's much more than that, because how do you know a date, and how do you name a date? You don't have cell phone, you don't have a computer, and you don't have TV, you don't have broadcast, you don't have anyone telling you those dates. So calendar give people time, and those time in the ancient civilization, those time are basically telling them what to do to be able to have a good year, to not be starving. So those are life and death matters for those ancient civilizations. And the Son of Heaven shrouded within those kind of religious performances, shrouded those knowledge, those something we might consider scientific within this kind of religious performance. And those are pretty much interpreted as having the authorization by God in heaven. And that is the significance of this building, called the Mingtang. It is to be performed within by the Son of Heaven as a way to authorize him for the mandate of heaven. And that is why it is simultaneously a religious center, a administration center, and an education center. Because for ancient civilization, these are just one thing. And the Son of Heaven had a special kind of ability to make connection between heaven and earth. And by performing according to an annual cycle in the building of Mingtang, he was claiming the position as the representative on earth of the heavenly kind of beings, claiming the mandate of heaven. Right? This is just one of the reconstruction of this building. Obviously, today from archaeological data, all we have is the plan. The plan. So we know the plan very well. But for specific roof type and roof form, these are basically imagined by the archaeologists. For example, another archaeologist actually put a round roof in the center, because the specific form of the roof is not recorded in the archaeological plan. So according to another archaeologist, the roof has a round pavilion, round hall on the third floor, not a square one. So in that case, there are, the interaction between circle and square has one more layer. All right, so basically these are all very accurate, and this kind of three-dimensional drawings is reconstructed with very educated guessworks. How did the archaeologists went about to make that guess, to reconstruct a square roof or a round roof? It is because the Han Dynasty has left a lot of images of architecture. Some of them survived in the form of two-dimensional drawings and carvings, and some of them are in the form of three-dimensional models. They mostly survived in tombs, right? So the Han Dynasty people believe, you know, after one died, one lived in a different world, but follow with the same needs and the same kind of activity on Earth. So a filial son would offer their deceased ancestor, deceased parents a house to live, and they put these little small house model in the tomb of their ancestor. So these models gave us direct kind of look at how the building, Han Dynasty building, might look like. So these are basically the data, the material for the archaeologists to come up with a reconstruction of Mingtang. So here you can see this is the elevation of the Mingtang reconstructed by one archaeologist. So the roof was inspired by those two models from Han Dynasty. And you can see the way this ridge is constructed. It's pretty much following this roof model. And there are many house models survived in Han Dynasty tombs, as well as carvings. This is the carving on a brick. It shows kind of a similar kind of a roof style, as well as the sloping eaves, and also the structure with brackets. In the Han Dynasty, the brackets basically came in the form of a one long arm with two blocks, and so very rudimentary. There's no kind of intricate layers of brackets, just one long arm supporting two big blocks. And that long arm is supported by one big block underneath. And then below that block is the column. So from these images, we have a fairly good understanding of Han Dynasty architecture. There are other ones like the stone chair from the Han Dynasty. So you have read some of those material in your textbook, as well as the readings. You know, Han Dynasty, there are no quote unquote architecture survived, but there are footprint of architecture from archaeology, and there are images and models of architecture from those tombs. So we put them together and we can reconstruct the Han Dynasty building. So this building, I mentioned that it has earth core, right? So the ground floor earth core is this wide, right? So on the ground floor, and now I'm drawing a section upon this elevation, right? So imagine you cut it in the middle and you got this section. This is the ground floor. There's an earth core on the ground floor and surrounded by corridor from the four sides. So on the second floor, the earth core is about this wide. And then it is surrounded by the big room on one side, on the in the inner circle, and then the smaller the three smaller rooms on each side, right? And then the upper floor, there's no earth core, is one big room with corridors and pavilions. According to one archaeologist, there are these pavilions. So this kind of building, called high platform building, it's the same as the so-called 台榭, in one of your reading by Professor Fu Xinian, for the previous lectures on the Zhou dynasty. The characteristic of this kind of building is to have the combination of earth and wood, and the rammed earth platform was to elevate the height of the building so that even though the technology of wooden construction is no more than 2-floor high, it gives you an appearance of a 3, even 4-story look, right? So using the rammed earth to elevate the building and wrapping the rammed earth up by wooden structures so that from outside, it looks as if you have a 3-story building, but in fact, you don't need to master the technology of building 3-story pure wood structure because the upper floors are raised upon rammed earth platform. Right? So these are called 台榭 in the Zhou dynasty. And we call it high platform building. It is characterized by the combination, the elevation and wrapping, the elevation upon and wrapping up of the rammed earth platform by the wooden structures to create a multi-story building appearance. And in reality, the true space inside is never more than 2-story, never actually more than 2 stories. Right? So that's the nature of this 台榭, or high platform building. And that's also why in archaeology, all those architectural sites related to palaces have rammed earth platform, because to achieve the grand look, they all need huge rammed earth to elevate the height and scale of their building. I do want to point out some similarity of Chinese architecture with architecture of other civilizations. So you guys most of you have taken architecture 1310, and a form like this and elevating a building on top of it might remind you, for example, the ziggurat in Mesopotamia, or even the stepped pyramid in Egypt. So kind of elevating building to a certain height to claim connection with divinity is a kind of a universal phenomena in architecture, East and West. So just to show you a few pictures of the other Han Dynasty sources for architecture. For example, this is a stone carving of a gate tower called the Que. So from the literature as well as imagery, we know that Han Dynasty cities were gated with 2 towers framing the side, and those are called the Que. the Qi has kind of different rank. For example, this is like a middle rank Qi. It has 2 towers on each side, right? So they are always symmetrical. So there are always kind of 2 towers, but for each of the side, it has 2 sections, right? It's 1 section, 2 section. So kind of a middle rank gate tower. So in the Confucian society, everything is hierarchical. So the idea is that harmony is not created by equinity. Harmony is created by kind of performing your appropriate part according to your status. So that's the essence of yin and yang relationship. It's not equal. There's a dominant branch. There's also a submissive branch. So everything has a rank to show the hierarchy. This is the middle rank. It has 2 sections. The highest rank would have 3 sections. You know, you might have another roof here, and you would have a 3 section Qi. And of course, there is a lower one which might have only 1 section. So this kind of gate, specific gate type called Qi, is very popular in Han Dynasty. It might be connected with walls so that the gate is real. It might also be freestanding, right? You might have just those a Qi, not connected with any enclosing surrounding walls. And in that case, it is marking symbolic trespassing into a sacred realm. So a lot of Han Dynasty tombs were framed that way. So the road leading to the tomb site are framed by those Qi. Sometimes these Qi are freestanding. There are no connection in the middle. There are no connection on the side, just freestanding towers, and with different numbers of sections, either 1 or 3 or 2, to show the rank. And those freestanding Qis are usually used to frame the entrance to the tomb vicinities. So those are also called Qi. So this is an important Han Dynasty type. So this is the freestanding Qi that I'm talking about. It is framing of the passage to a tomb for a Han Dynasty official called Gao Yi. So this is called the Gao Yi Qi, or Gao Yi Mu Qi, Gao Yi Tomb Qi, or Tomb Gate. So these are freestanding. And this is also a middle rank Qi. It has 2 sections. This is the left tower, and there is a right one to make a pair. And there is no connection in the middle. So it's just freestanding, not connected to wall, to frame the passage into the kind of spiritual world of the funeral architecture. And this Gao Yi Qi is a stone carving freestanding monument, but it is mimicking timber structure. If you look at the specific carving, you notice it is mimicking here, the circles mimicking rafters, and here, I'm sorry, the circle mimicking the tile end. So there's a roof tile, you have those tile end, and the square here mimicking the rafters. And here we have the beams, and the beams are supported by dougong, all right, brackets. And this brackets has a characteristic Han Dynasty feature of just 1 big block called dou, supporting 1 big arm called gong. And on top of this arm, there are 2 smaller blocks, 2 smaller dou. So the logical interpretation is that in the Han Dynasty, there are more que constructed in wood and in greater scale. So this is a stone carving for eternity. A characteristic phenomena in traditional Chinese architecture is that the tomb are constructed with more permanent material of stone, while the architecture for living were constructed with the kind of a more short-living material of wood. And it has puzzling people's mind for a long time. People kept asking why did the Chinese sticking to wood for the construction of their important architecture? Why not using stone for everything? But this is a phenomena. So I think I offered a few answers or response to this question in my video. If you are interested, you can watch it again. So that's another, to some extent, this is also a source for the interpretation of Han Dynasty architecture, because it's mimicking wooden construction. By looking into the detail of this chair, you can also kind of reconstruct a wooden chair by looking at the detail and analyzing the detail. So just to show you a few more Han Dynasty architectural imagery, these are the kind of watchtower called watchtower, and they were also from tombs. And these watchtower would have a great impact on the future development of Chinese pagoda, right? During the Han Dynasty, there was no pagoda yet, because Buddhism was not introduced to China yet during the Han Dynasty, right? So these towers must have other significance. Some scholars believe they were just a watchtower. Like in another Han Dynasty carving, it shows a courtyard house. While on one side, we have the main hall and the courtyard and a host and a guest sitting in the main hall. And on the side yard, there's a kitchen, and a servant is kind of killing a pig here. So we interpret this as a side courtyard with kitchen and other facility. And then at the corner is a tower. And that tower kind of looks like those tomb models. And it could be a watchtower. Right, to have a watchtower at the corner of a compound makes sense, because it allowed someone to look around for defense, to recognize a potential harm to the family. So it could be a watchtower, but other scholars disagree. Other scholars believe this watchtower were connected with Taoist kind of immortal worship. The Chinese people believe that immortals like to live on high towers, live closer to heaven. And if you get to really high location, you have a chance to get in touch with those immortals and heavenly beings, to hopefully become an immortal or get those elixir from those immortals. So immortals like high towers, right? 仙人洗楼居, that's a Chinese term for that. So some scholars believe these towers buried in the tomb was hoping that it could bring immortality to their deceased ancestor. And these towers often shows people playing music on the tower, and shows birds to probably indicate how high these buildings are. And one interpretation is this is connected with the immortal kind of worship. So there probably are multi-story buildings from the Han Dynasty without an earth core, but they are probably of smaller size. If you want to build a big size, multi-story looking building in Han Dynasty, you probably still need the help of a earth core, the rammed earth platform. So yeah, so those the two different kind of interpretations of these high towers models in a tomb. And there are, none of the Han Dynasty tomb had been excavated, but some local tombs had been excavated, and in your textbook there are some detailed information on the tomb. So if you want to do a writing project regarding funeral architecture or tomb, you can find plenty of material. Even so far, we only cover to the Han Dynasty. You notice the tomb and you notice the gate for the tomb. So the example for the final project I gave you is the gate. So you can see right here, there are a variety of gate. This is underground. And of course, the Qi is also a gate, right? So there are a lot of material about gate in Chinese architecture. So something for you to consider for your final project. And of course, there are many, many more. For example, roof. The roof style of Chinese architecture is also very colorful and worth a research and writing about. Or of course, you can focus on kind of spatial connection, how the space was displayed in Chinese architecture. So just something for you to consider. That's a side branch from this slide. But let's focus on this tomb. So this underground tomb, this one is from the Henan province. It belonged to a local official called Zhang Boya. So his tomb, Zhang Boya's tomb, this is not an imperial tomb, but it is impressive enough. It is pretty large, and it is also very elaborate in terms of its decoration and carving, right? The tomb chamber features the kind of a symmetry, just like the courtyard compound on Earth. It has a central room, central big hall. It has side chambers. The side chambers were used for the accompanying objects, utensils that the tomb master might be able to use in his afterlife. And then the main chamber was, of course, his sarcophagus. So a noteworthy feature is that these tombs are constructed with masonry technology, and they have true vaults. So here we have this barrel vault constructed with stone. And the Chinese did use stone for architecture, but they reserved them for tomb, not using them for life, right? So it's not right to say all Chinese architecture are timber or are wooden architecture. No, they are masonry architecture, but they are mostly underground and mostly used to construct structures and spaces for religious purposes, for funeral purposes, but very rarely for the living city or compound. The doors are carved with intricate patterns, and there are creatures in between. For example, here you might recognize a deer with all those kind of cloud patterns and motifs. So here we are basically looking at the back chamber guarded by many layers of gate. And these gates are symbolic, all right? So it is shown as if one door is open, another door is closed, but in reality, they are in place. They are not movable. They are just built there. You are not supposed to actually open or close it. It is constructed as if this is a house in usage, being being occupied and being used. The door is half open. The gate is half open, as if someone is using it. So they imagine burying their dead so that they are actually kind of living there, right? That's the idea. And there are all those utensils for them to enjoy and to continue using as if they were alive in another world. This is another tomb. You also see these two kind of arch and a beam. This is obviously structurally redundant. If you have that arch, you don't need a central pillar, but there is also a central pillar elaborately carved, which make one think that the column decoration and these images here are for not structural functional purposes, but for religious purposes, because this is the much more decorative than the side columns. And there are kind of figures, phoenix and dragon figures carved there. So probably they have more symbolic meaning than kind of functional, structural, necessity. Yeah, I think by this slide, I just wanted to reiterate that there are masonry architecture in Chinese architecture, but they are just used for either spiritual purposes or just pure practical purposes. For example, there are also bridges constructed with arches in ancient China. So bridges, tombs, and later, pagodas and religious architectures were brick or masonry structures. So they are either for spiritual architecture or for utilitarian structures.